Okay, so welcome everybody to 2 of our SIGCOMM education workshop. Yesterday was really amazing. I don't know, we had maybe 100, 120 people there in the morning session, PDT, and then we had about a dozen people last night as well. And the Slack channel has just been totally awesome in terms of all of the discussion that's going on. You've seen what the agenda looks like today. We're going to be focusing on pedagogy in session 4. Then we're going to do breakout sessions for an hour, and then we're going to come back for a final session looking forward and bigger picture issues. We've had some input from folks about BOFs, and Matt and I have done some discussion about how we might do that. So Matt, let me put up a slide about the BOFs and maybe just say a few words about this. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. Oops. Okay. There we go. Can you see the BOF information, Matt?
Yes. Should I talk through this? Or?
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay, sure. So we're going to be doing multiple BOFs, and 2 of them are described here. And they're focused on kind of these different topics. And we were thinking it might be good to kind of organize them around producing some sort of deliverable or some sort of document by the end. And so what we did is we created these 2 Google Docs, and the Google Docs are kind of organized around the different themes that we were thinking of producing. The first BOF is on a topic that a lot of you were interested in based on the survey results. A lot of you kind of wanted to have some sort of idea about the best ways to teach online. So the idea behind this document is we're going to create a document about best practices for teaching networking online. So it's going to be a list of best practices, tips and ideas about how you can teach networking online. The second BOF is going to focus around developing a list or a set of useful resources for teaching networking online. So things like classes that have previously been developed, neat labs, infrastructure and things like that. And so if you look at these documents, they're kind of organized as lists. The first one lists out a set of best practices. The second one lists out a set of resources, but they're very incomplete right now, and we need your help to kind of fill them in and put your ideas in. They're world writable, so you can click in there and just start typing. We have track changes turned on, so we can kind of keep track and thank you for your edits and stuff like that. And that's also so edits don't conflict, but so you can just kind of click and type and edit. You can also post comments on the site if you want. And then, so there's these 2 BOFs, and there will probably be 1 or 2 more. And if you're interested in doing a BOF, please let us know.
Right, and let me just say, reiterate what Matt said a little bit about the documents themselves. When we did the pre-workshop survey, a lot of you folks were saying, oh, I'm really looking, for instance, for best practices or where I can find resources. And so we heard a lot of really interesting talks about that. And so in a sense, these are synthesis documents. And maybe the way to think about a document is just one big bulletin board, which we can all write on at this point. So please don't delete what other people have done, but add commentary wherever, and then we'll take up the editing task afterwards to sort of regularize the 2 docs. And again, there can be continuing discussion about these, continuing editing of these, but we think that these 2 documents might be very useful for folks who are not participating in this workshop, and even for us, all of us in this workshop, they might be useful, tip sheets that we can refer to. So think of it as one big community bulletin board where we're posting ideas and commentary. Okay. So let's see, it's 9/11 Pacific or sorry, 8:11 Pacific Daylight Time. We're going to come back and we're going to start the next session at 8:15. We're going to add the panelists for the next session, and so we'll start in just 3 or 4 minutes. So you can just hang on here, grab a cup of coffee or whatever you need to do. We'll be back live in, well, this channel will stay open, but we'll start up in 4 minutes. So Torsten and Dimitri, I've promoted you to panelists.
Oh, thank you.
Florian, now you're a panelist.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Jiasi, you're a panelist.
I didn't get it. Was this coming from me?
So Dimitris is my backup in case something happens with my internet connection. Since
right, so many of us are on vacation and traveling right now. I'm in the middle of the Colorado Rocky Mountains, and Torsten was a little bit worried about his internet connection. So you're the backup, Dimitris.
Yep, sure.
And let's see, I don't see Katrina yet.
Hello, can you hear me? Testing my audio.
Hi, Jiasi.
Hey. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Dan, you're ready. And so I think we're just waiting for Katrina.
She just sent a chat on the Zoom that she's online.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
didn't see her in the list.
I'll just look for her again.
Jim, her hand is raised, so you can just scroll to the top of the list.
Yeah, I see. Katrina. Hey, Katrina, you're a panelist also. I think we've got all of our panelists online and ready to go. So we'll start in just a minute.
Is the order of the panelists the same as online? Just want to make sure that I'm queued up for when I'm on deck when the next person. It'd be nice to know who's before me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's Dan, you're going to be the last panelist.
Perfect.
So first we'll have Torsten, Katrina, then Florian, and you'll be our last panelist.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Jiasi, ready to start things off?
Yeah, great. Let me share my screen. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you everyone for joining, and thanks especially to our panelists. This is session 4, so we'll be talking today about pedagogy and techniques and tips. It's been a really interesting discussion so far. I've been listening to the sessions all yesterday, so I'm hoping today in this session we can talk about more specific techniques that people have found useful in their classes. So first I'll just give an overview of the papers that were in this session. And I've tried to organize them along several sub-themes. So we have a number of papers that are about instruction. Papers 4, 7, and 8 are just generally about instruction. Papers 3 and 9 are about projects and assignments. And there's one paper that talks about discussing papers in a class. And then the remaining set of papers are more about assessment. So how do we assess the students accurately, especially in online? Okay, so we'll start overviewing of the papers. So the general papers about instruction. First one here is about active learning in undergrad computer net systems before and after the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's a paper from MIT, and Katrina is one of our panelists today. So she'll be giving you more detail, but the paper is about a very large and complex computer networking class with 400 students and 30 staff members. And the paper talks about various techniques for encouraging active learning, like having debates about topics, acting out certain systems like MapReduce, and also their semester-long design project. The next paper is about 6 thoughts on computer networking education and how to leverage its nature. It's by Dr. Madaminoff from Stony Brook in the US, and it has several big picture thoughts on teaching online. These thoughts include how to solicit student feedback, equal access, the role of homework, and how we can select relevant material that's both up to date and useful for students to learn. The next paper is about teaching, how the internet works remotely but still hands-on. And it's by Professor Van River from ETH Zurich. And this is also another of these more high-level papers that talks about reflections and tips on online learning. And a particularly interesting aspect of this paper is their class-wide project, where they create a mini internet where teams of students each operate their own AS, and the class has to make their mini internet work together. And they present their reflections on this and actually said that this mini internet project worked really well during the most recent semester when the class was online. Okay, some papers about instruction and projects in terms of projects and assignments. So this paper is about an online project-based learning assignment for programming an event-driven simulator to analyze queuing-based systems. And it's by 2 professors from the University of Cantabria in Spain. So it talks about creating an event-driven simulator to analyze network protocols. And this is a class-long design project. And it builds on the students' previous knowledge of network protocols and gets them to make the simulator to hopefully match the analytic results of these protocols. And this paper talks about how to adapt such a project to an online format. And they said that having small Q&A sessions, offline videos to explain the concepts tended to be well received by the students. This paper number 9 is about worksheets to foster active learning in computer networks, and it's by Dr. Satyavolu from Cal State in Monterey Bay. It talks about how to break down complex computer network topics. You know, sometimes you have these crazy word problems, how you can break them down into concrete mini problems with like multiple choice answers or other types of answers. And it talks about how they structured their class. Half of the class is for lecture and the half is for students to work on labs or worksheets with supervision. And this paper has a lot of nice examples of some of the worksheet problems they use, including unit conversions, throughput calculations, TCP behavior, different scheduling schemes. It might actually be something useful for the community resources if the author is willing to release it. We have one paper about paper discussion, and we'll hear from Dr. Tschorsch today as one of the panelists. And this paper talks about their digital paper discussion club for a group of master's students, and talks about how they selected paper for the discussion club, how they assigned roles to students to facilitate the discussion, and includes feedback from the students on their workload for this class. And it's particularly interesting because it talks about how you facilitate discussion with all the students are in a video conference. Okay, the last 4 papers on the session are about assessment. And paper number 2 is about peer assessment in a wireless networking context from Dr. Onar and the Middle East Technical University. And it talks about using the peer assessment module in Moodle and how their experiences with that went. And it has a lot of detailed results about the grades that were produced by the students for assessing each other's class projects and how you can actually assess the assessment itself. So it's kind of interesting topic. Paper number 5 is about assessment of computer networks during the pandemic and beyond. And it basically talks about how you could design a system to automatically assign questions to students. These questions could be assigned both randomly, so you assign a subset of questions to each student, and how you modify the parameters inside the question. So for example, you could change the network topology for for a given question. And they divide the question categories into different categories here, like network fundamentals, planning, protocols, and network design. And then they try to assign questions equally from each of these categories. Number 6 is running written exams online at Bern amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have the panelists here today, Dr. Braun. And it talks about how you monitor students during a live exam when this exam is worth a large portion of the student grade. And it talks a lot about the specific methodology where they use Zoom to distribute the questions, monitor the students with video and audio, and have the students take pictures to submit their answers. And I saw there's some interesting discussion on the Slack right before about whether we should be using video to monitor the students. So I think this will be a really interesting topic for discussion. And last but not least, we have video assessment tasks in tertiary education, practice and experience in STEM by Matt Ruffin at the University of Adelaide. And this paper talks about instead of having a poster presentation in a class, what happens if you do 3-minute videos to evaluate the students instead. And has a lot of detail of both qualitative feedback from the students and also quantitative feedback. And it talks about also the time overhead of creating these videos and also assessing these videos in comparison to a traditional poster presentation. Okay, so these are the 10 papers that are in this session. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes to share some of my own thoughts or maybe questions that we can discuss after in the open discussion period. So my first thought, so I teach computer networking. I taught it to grad students this past semester at quarter, so it was online. And one question I had was that teachers, we have a dual role between instructing the students and also assessing the students. So how should we balance between these two roles, especially during a pandemic? So should we go focus a little bit more on the instruction, for example, during a pandemic, and maybe a little less on the assessment since the students have so many other issues on their minds? How do we balance these two roles? And I think I'm still learning. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that. The second point I was thinking about is, are there advantages from online teaching that will carry on in the future? So I think we've talked a lot about things that we've tried to do to make the online experience match the offline, but can the online actually benefit us? So an example is some of my colleagues that have been doing live streaming of their classes on Twitch, which is like a popular video game streaming platform. And the students seem really receptive to it, and it also reaches a broader audience. So, are there any other things like that that we could take from online teaching into the future? And finally, my last point is how to facilitate real-time student feedback and discussions. I feel like especially with computer networking, it can sometimes end up being, acronym soup or just a lot of high-level concepts. So to really help students understand these kind of issues or ideas, how can we keep them engaged in the material when it's not just like computing a math problem or something like that? So how do we do that in general in an offline scenario in the classroom, and how do we also do that online? So that's just some of my thoughts, but I think you guys are here probably to hear our wonderful panelists. So our 4 panelists today are Dr. Torsten Braun, Dr. Katrina LaCurts, Dr. Florian Tschorsch, and Dr. Dan Garcia. And this is the order that we'll go in. So Dr. Braun, if you'd like to start, please take the screen.
Okay. Hello. So can you see the screen?
Yep, looks great.
Okay,
Yep.
good. So I want to talk about a topic which has already been introduced. It means in particular how we did our exam in two courses, in a bachelor course and in a master level course. And let me start with the initial state. So we started mid of February with our two courses, two presence courses, a bachelor course on operating systems and a master level course, credit course on network security. So our typical format, we have 2 hours of lectures and then 1 hour exercise lessons by a teaching assistant with some weekly assignments. And the grade of these weekly assignments usually make it to 25%. Then everything has been assisted by a learning management system called ILIAS in our case for theoretical and practical exercises, and also a discussion forum to discuss certain questions. We had 2 tools for lecturing, for recording the lectures. One called Switchcast, which has been installed in the lecture room itself, in some lecture rooms, but for the smaller one, I use Camtasia on my own laptop. And we already announced to the class that there will be some written exams of 60 minutes at the end of the semester, beginning of June, which make it to 75% of the grade. So then 1 month later, there was this soft lockdown in Switzerland, and the university immediately announced that all courses will continue as online only. In our case, I did a pre-recording of my lecture. So you can see an example here using the lecture picture and some annotations on that, and audio using Camtasia. So I was quite familiar with that since more than 10 years, and used then for questions and answers the forum in the learning management system. Also, more or less simultaneously, the university administration announced that all the exams have to be online at the date which was initially announced. And also they announced that failed attempts do not count. But if someone is detected that he or she cheats, then the exam will count it as failed. So somehow some motivation not to cheat. Since nothing serious can happen if you basically fail the exam, then you can repeat it. So what were the requirements? So we had 50 plus 30 students in the 2 lectures, and we had the requirement that the date could not be shifted, everything online, no physical attendance. Of course, we should now design an exam where the possibility of cheating is somehow minimized. Of course, you never can avoid any kind of cheating. And also the original assessment quality should be achieved, and everything should have some certain acceptance by the students. So what have been the options? One option, we also usually do our oral exams, but with 80 students and about some 40 minutes per student plus some break, that this would keep 2 persons busy for 2 weeks. And it's not possible to just delegate the examination to teaching assistants. So I have to be present. So that would have taken me at least 2 weeks full time. We could have done or designed some exam using the LMS, but our computer services department warned us not to do that, since they were concerned about the scalability, in particular when all the lectures, at least we have some 17,000 students in the University of Bern, more or less have exams at the same week. Then we could have done some individual group project presentation, but we felt that this needs more time to prepare. Also, it's a little bit difficult to cover everything which has been taught in the course, and we also had something like that, some small project before, and some students felt that this is quite some effort which has to be done there. So in the end, we went for the remote written exam. Fortunately, our university had a license for Zoom, and we used a Zoom session with a lot of restrictions, so no private chats, no screen sharing. Then we asked the students to install a camera, making the student workplace visible to the teaching assistants and to me. And that was already before discussed with the university administration, and we got the okay legally. That means there were no legal concerns about that, but no recording of the audio and video was allowed. So an example workplace, a deal workplace is here, where a student has his or her laptop, where basically the questions were then displayed, and then we should just have a view what the student is doing. So the student should not have any interaction with the computer, but the computer screen was used to display the questions. So all the exams have been open book, but only paper. So there have been some wishes from students to use their laptop, but we didn't allow that. So we wanted to control that only paper is used to look up some things. Also, we divided the exam into 4 parts or groups with some breaks. And the reason for that was manifold. So for example, one reason was that some students that they have to go to the bathroom at some time. So we needed to have a break somewhere. Also, we wanted to keep the students somehow busy, and we wanted to avoid the case, for example, that very good students are finished after half an hour of the 60 minutes and can then, for example, support some others. Also, this partitioning was done in order to have some kind of possibility to have a break where we could solve some technical issues. So there were quite a few reasons for doing that. Then in each break or at the end, the solutions have to be delivered to us. It means people have been seeing the questions and then putting on paper the answers, and in the break or at the end, the solutions had to be emailed to us, and we checked whether everything has arrived, and then we continued. Also, that's also quite important, we asked, based on the advice of the university, a manually written and signed declaration of originality, where people or the students declared that they do not cheat, and also we announce that if they are cheating, we have quite some severe consequences. So you see also on the right side that basically we had some questions for the network security exam in that case. So what have been the experiences? What I did not mention, we had in the middle of the semester a preparation or test exam, where we tested everything. So we tested the setup and the test of the software and the hardware, and try to make the students familiar with the software and the hardware, but also with the procedure. And we also collected some feedback from the students. Based on that, we made some adjustments. For example, in one course, we did not have a look on the audio, so we only used the video in that case. What we also learned, in the end, we needed approximately double of the time as usual. That means instead of 1 hour, we needed 2 hours. There have been some technical problems that could be solved by backup solutions. For example, there was a short interrupt disruption, so then the student gave me a call, or some student could not deliver the solution by email, then we used a messenger. And in the end, we had grades which were very, very similar than in recent years. So in the end, in the network security exam, we had an average of 4.8, I think. So it means 6 is the best, 4 is passed, which is quite similar to recent years. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for your attendance, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions.
Great, thank you, Dr. Braun. Katrina, would you like to proceed?
Yes, all right, let's see. You can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'm Katrina LaCurts, and I lead the main undergrad computer systems class at MIT. I teach this class along with a lot of other people, including Manya and Karen, who are both here on Slack right now. So I'll start by giving you an overview of the course, which goes by the MIT number 6033. We will often just shorten it to 033. So this is a large systems class. It's required for all computer science majors at MIT. A lot of things make it interesting, but one of the things that makes it the most interesting is that it actually fulfills a communication requirement at MIT. So the students do a lot of reading, writing, discussing, things like that. And kind of coupled with that, we focus a lot on how and why systems are designed in particular ways, not just on the technical details of how they work. The class is structured in a fairly standard way at MIT. We have large lectures. We have smaller discussion sections, which we call recitations. We have a semester-long project in the class. And the way the pandemic hit us last semester, about halfway through the semester, all of our students were sent home. So we had about 2 weeks to get everything online and figure out what we were going to do. Our main goal was to try to support students that were in all different sorts of circumstances. So the class is so large, so we had students spread out across, pretty much every time zone, different levels of access to the internet, even access to power, access to quiet space for learning. And we really wanted to maintain engagement in the class. And one of the ways that we always do that is with active learning, which is what I'm going to focus on today. And so active learning shows up most commonly in our recitations. So I'm going to focus on how those work. So pre sort of disruption, what are these recitations like? They each focus on a single technical paper, which the students read beforehand. And our students really do read the paper beforehand because of how we run these recitations. So we do a lot of active learning. The students are actively involved in the discussions. We do very little lecturing. So to give you a sense of what that's like, a few things that we commonly do. One of the things that we do in almost every recitation, sometimes even multiple times per recitation, is pose some question to the students, have them think about it in small groups, and then come back together as a class. So you can see a question that we might ask them about Akamai here. We also have them do debates where we'll pose some statement, we'll put them into teams, they will get to prepare and present and argue, and then we have a discussion as a class about sort of who had the most convincing argument. We do a lot of other activities, other common ones that we do, having them draw, analyze, discuss diagrams. And we do have them act out a lot of systems. That is kind of everyone's favorite activity. We have a detailed example in the paper of how we do that for MapReduce. So this style of learning has really improved engagement in 033. Students speak up more. We don't have issues with one student dominating the discussion. Our students come prepared for these classes because they know we're not going to lecture to them. So then, the pandemic hits. What happened? To keep students engaged, we really wanted to think about how to translate some of this to remote learning. And so the main way we did that was to take this kind of most common and in some ways most accessible style of active learning where we have small discussions to big discussions, and we sort of flipped it. So we really started doing bigger class-wide discussions and then following up with those on small groups. So the way this worked in practice, we gave students questions to discuss and debate on Piazza, which is our class forum ahead of recitation. You can see an example question that we gave them about Meltdown here. Students were graded on their participation here, so they participated. And then after they had done some of that discussion, we met with students in smaller groups. So instead of 20 or 25 students at a time, we met with 5 or 6 usually students at once to talk about the paper. And we scheduled these sessions around students. So we attempted to accommodate, all sorts of circumstances. So it was not the case that students just couldn't make these discussions. So how did this go? A lot of it went really well. The discussions that we saw on Piazza before recitations were really fruitful. Students had a lot of back and forth on Piazza. They came prepared to the recitations, definitely ready to talk at a high level about the paper. The discussions themselves worked really well once our students got comfortable with Zoom. Unfortunately, that did take a few weeks, and we only had so much of the semester left. We also found that some students, in fact, spoke up more in this environment than they did in person, which was really interesting and kind of exciting to see for those students. And we got a lot of great feedback on how flexible we were, both by scheduling things around students, but also working out different ways to allow them to access the course. So, you know, some students had worse internet connections. We were fine for them to turn off their video or to call in. Some students we even had participating just via chat. And we got a lot of really positive feedback on this. Engagement in the class as a whole remained pretty high. For instance, their semester-long project, their design project, those went really well. So, you know, we've been grading design projects for years now, and this year's were of the same caliber we would always expect. And not everything was perfect. One of the big things that didn't work well for us, students definitely had less of an understanding of the technical details of the papers. We gave them a lot of material to try to support them in that, sort of, you know, things that they should know, guidance for where to find those things in the paper, encouragement to ask questions on Piazza. They were hesitant to do this, so that's certainly something we're thinking about for the next time we teach 033. So 033 is spring only. We're not prepping for the fall right now. In terms of our future plans, we are considering some more radical structural changes to the class, and we have a lot of ideas for how to incorporate some more of our active learning exercises back into the class. Basically, now that we've been through this once, we have a sense of what is possible. But there are two big takeaways here for me. The absolute best thing that we did here, the thing that I am the most proud of, is that we really kept students engaged with this class. You know, we use active learning to do that always, and it was certainly helpful here. But one of the biggest things that we did was try to accommodate every student's circumstances. We always try to do that in 033, but especially now, you know, students can't learn if they can't access the class. And then the second thing that I think is a big takeaway for us, this obviously wasn't perfect. Nobody wanted the pandemic to happen. We were able to adapt the class fairly easily because this is a class where we've always prioritized how we teach, not just what we're teaching. So we are a class that even, you know, before this all happened, we dedicate time to planning, to pedagogy, to training new staff every single week, right? We have dedicated time in staff meetings for this. And so ultimately that really gave us the time and the space to shift and to think about how to move the class online. Cool.
Great. Thank you, Katrina. That was really great. Shall we move on? So our next speaker is panelist is Dr. Tschorsch. Excuse me for the pronunciation.
No problem. Thank you. I guess you can see my screen, right? So.
Yes.
All right. Let's start. So I have the pleasure to present our digital seminar concept today. It's a paper discussion club that we designed on the topic of advanced protocols of internet communication. Elias and Christoph are part of this as well. They are research and teaching assistants also present today in this digital workshop. So please feel free to contact any of us if you have any questions. So we designed this as a paper discussion club with weekly gatherings, virtual gatherings to discuss a paper of the week. And we had two primary teaching goals here with a number of secondary teaching goals that I'm not able to get into detail with, but I would like to mention those primary ones here. So the first one here is we would like to introduce students a bit more to computer networking research and to get them familiar with this topic, because from what we have seen, there's a gap between all these specialized courses and also their introductory courses to computer networking, at least at our university. So we want to raise their attention to these research approaches and research results. In order to do that, we compiled a list of different papers, different types of papers, different topics of papers. So we have one focus area on transport protocols, in particular the evolution of transport protocols, as well as on future internet architectures. We have measurement studies, but also papers on designing new protocols as well. So also offering students a diversity of papers. And in fact, also some older papers and newer papers, and also some of not the best quality here to have something to discuss, in fact. So that was one of the teaching goals that we had in mind with this course. The original motivation, however, was that we recognized that students have or lack a certain ability of reading papers, and in particular to read, understand, and discuss these scientific contributions. To some extent, I even had the feeling that they were kind of intimidated by these papers and did not get an introduction to them. So what we thought about is, well, let's change that and we'll let them acquire and practice this ability of reading and papers and training this together with us in an open environment here. And that was our major approach and our major motivation here. In order to give this digital seminar a little bit of structure, what we did was we introduced a number of roles that helped us to get the discussion running and also to engage students in this discussion here. So we had basically three roles. We had a leading role, an expert, and a number of participants here. In fact, we had exactly one lead and we had exactly one expert each week, and a number of participants, and typically the whole group was 10 to a maximum of 15 students here. The role of the lead is to basically chair the whole session of our seminar. We did that in virtual meetings. In this case, we also used Zoom as a virtual meeting room, and the lead shared the screen showing the respective paper and was responsible for keeping track of time, chairing this session, introducing, providing a brief introduction of the paper, but also engaging all the others. That was the main job here, and we recognize that in particular, since we are in a digital realm, this role was very important because it was also a technical job to manage this this session here as well. The second role, the expert, is a little bit more prepared than all the others. So we expect from an expert to have some kind of background knowledge, to acquire some kind of background knowledge, consult maybe related work to the paper, and brings to the discussion some background information, helps out if something is not clear enough or some background information are lacking. These two roles alone also led to the situation that we have quite naturally a discussion between lead and expert, because the lead, as the one that is moderating and chairing the session, and the expert that is providing background information, they already could have a dialogue online, which avoided such awkward silence moments, and therefore was the icebreaker basically for such an online discussion here. And then the third role of the participants, they, as everybody else, should be prepared and had read the paper basically, but we of course cannot expect a complete knowledge and complete understanding of the paper, which was not the goal in any case here. But they should come forward with questions, with points that were not clear right from the beginning, to raise during a session and try to discuss and commonly establish an understanding of the paper. And participants were also asked to comment and also answer questions as well. So it was not only the job by the lead or by the expert to answer these questions. And yeah, well, we as a teaching staff also considered us as basically participants. So we tried to reduce our interventions as much as possible here to really focus and put in the center the discussion on the paper as well. So that's basically the whole setup here. There are more nooks and crannies that I'm not able to get into the details here, but let me share some lessons that we have learned over conducting this in the past semester. So first of all, students indeed gained practice in reading papers. So we see that from student evaluation, but also from anecdotal evidence from the students themselves. They said, well, initially it was quite challenging and time consuming to really get to understand these papers. But during the course of this seminar, they were indeed able to acquire and improve their ability to understand the papers. They were able to understand the typical structure of a scientific paper, and that helped them a lot. So from some students, we already also know that they really think that this skill was valuable in their future studies, at least when it came to, for example, the thesis that they have written at the end of their studies. So that was a positive feedback to us that we succeeded at that point. When we come to the digital realm, the visual reference of sharing the screen, of seeing a common view on the paper worked really, really well. To see also some highlights by the lead, really being able to always catch up and seeing where are we in this paper, and not all having to ask exactly what section are you referring to, and so on. So this really helped us to align discussions, and we even think to introduce a very similar concept even in an offline iteration of such an course here or seminar as well. Third, we decided to go audio only. So we asked students to leave video off. The reason for that is are different. So on the one hand, we have very privacy conscious students. I'm not sure if this is a Berlin specific thing, but we respect that, of course, and therefore we decided to leave the video off right from the beginning, and also not to put any peer pressure here that some students have the video enabled and some have it disabled and feel pressured to enable that. So we simply said we leave it off from the first time. And then also it's quality of service. So since some students might have bottleneck bandwidth, and so we can improve the audio quality by really getting rid of the video stream here. And the students valued and appreciated this decision quite a lot. However, we also recognized and are convinced that maybe video conferencing would be improving the interactivity of this discussion, because then you also get a non-verbal feedback from students. So some that are from their personality maybe a little more passive, but still following the discussion. This is something that you maybe can see from a video feedback that you do not get from an audio only approach. So this is something that we will maybe change in the future and that we have to reassess in this course. And the last one is something that I already mentioned. We consider us as participants in the first place, but still we found that interventions from our side are very necessary to keep the discussion going at some point, but also to increase engagement from the participant side, to maybe raise questions that everybody can answer, and also make sure that in fact our hidden agenda also is covered. So by the end of the seminar, we had a number of discussion points that we tried to always make sure that they are present in this discussion. So talking about the methodology of a paper, or questioning if there are some hidden assumptions in the paper and so on. So always reflecting on that as well, but also talking maybe on the general comprehensibility of a paper. So how good was the paper written, and to reflect that also help students to learn something for their own research as part of their thesis as well. So that basically concludes my quick introduction. I encourage you to read our very short paper. It's a short read, so please go ahead, and if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I guess we'll have questions at the end, or there's also some lively discussion going on Slack. But for now, let's move on to our last, but certainly not least, panelist, Professor Dan Garcia.
Thank you so much. Can you see my slides?
Yep, can see it.
Yes, yes.
Great, wonderful. So feel free to grab, I think I had the Q&A and the chat here open. I was going to paste in, let me hit enter on that. That's the link that I have for all of my slides. Feel free to grab those. I also have kept some other resources that I want to share with you. So if you can use that link to get access to that whole folder, feel free to download that whole folder. I just basically collected any thoughts I've seen online that were useful in helping form my own thoughts about how to process all of this. Whoops, back one. So let me share a little story. This is a tale of two courses. I was teaching two courses. I taught three, but really the first two can be considered the same as the first category. A smaller course, we had 75 students who were doing teaching techniques for new TAs. I also was teaching, so I'm not a networking person, but I do teach computer architecture. So I teach some of the things that you folks teach, but I think many of the things that are being shared are more applicable to basically everybody. Teaching a non-majors course, Beauty and Joy of Computing, that has received some national recognition. We had about 150 students in that, and we meet quite often, twice a week for lecture, twice a week for 2-hour labs. So it's 7 contact hours a week, and they have a discussion. So on the left, I'll start with the left. We were doing this synchronous meeting. We had a big room. We had a room that held 75 people. That was wonderful, and we were doing a lot of active learning activities. We just continued that synchronously. This has never had an exam at the end. We had activities. We have journaling. All those things continued. The couple of things that actually Zoom helped. So it's really interesting. We have a lot of active learning in terms of turn to your neighbor and do something, maybe go online, write some notes, do compare and contrast, what your delivery method is or something. We did all those in breakout rooms, and it was very seamless. So we felt good about how that particular transformation worked. We actually felt that the Zoom recordings were wonderful. One of the things that was always hard is that we had all of the staff was so, face-to-face, we were so focused on the class that we never really supported anybody online. You're supposed to come to class and be there. So we never recorded anything. So if someone were sick or, they had a conference and they missed class, we didn't really have anything to give them. We certainly had the notes and the slides we presented, but mostly it wasn't about slides. It was about conversation interactions. But then we went online and we would record the whole session. Obviously, breakout sessions, you stop recording, but come back. But the point is, we actually now had a resource to give somebody who missed the class. So that was actually also better in a way. So mostly it worked out well. And in the summary, we got the highest ratings ever in the entire class. This is about 7 years or so of when we started keeping ratings in this class. And there's the highest ratings in history this last spring. And mostly, I think those ratings are dominating, the COVID time was dominating their thoughts. And they've just had, whatever it was, 9 or 10 weeks of the semester in, post-COVID. That's what they're really measuring us on. And so I think that they were pleased with how we worked out, how it all worked out. In our non-majors course, we moved to asynchronous lectures. So I had created an edX course on this, and I pointed them to the edX course. But then I used my normal lecture time as more office hours, more way to be face-to-face with our students. So normally I had 1 or 2 hours of office hours. This became now 4 hours, and they certainly appreciated that. We realized we needed to bring it down. Why do we have to? We were having our midterm just as we went online. We said, "Gosh, we have no idea how many students, how students are suffering." We did a survey, and they said, "Wow, they were losing motivation. They were worried about their family and their community, and they were just too stressed." So we actually dropped a project and an exam, and they were so pleased that we were receptive to that survey. So they rewarded us at the end. I'll show you the last line. For our final exam, assessment's always hard. I'm going to talk about that, and it was great to hear different techniques about assessment shared in this panel. we allowed them 3 days. This is a non-majors course. There's not a lot of cheating ever, and there's not really a lot of stress. We normally give A's and B's to basically everybody. We want people to not be penalized to try something new. If you're a chemistry major or philosophy major, try computer science for a semester. So mostly we reward them with pretty high grades. And so normally people don't cheat. So we said, let's trust our students. We had them fill in I won't cheat on this exam, and I know that if I do, I'll be punished severely. And a lot of them are freshmen, so they're worried about those things. So we gave them 3 days. They said, take 3 days rather than have, normally it'd be 3 hours for a paper exam, a normal sit down in a gym paper exam, and a 2 hour with computer exam. So it's about a 5 hour assessment. And we said, take 3 days to do it. And they did. And we saw no significant difference for any person who, say, had bombed the midterm but aced the final. We didn't see that. We looked at that data. We didn't see anybody move significantly more than they typically have moved. We also looked at how people typically move on the midterm to the final. Nobody really moved farther than they typically move. So we actually felt really, really good about the way it worked out. And again, here we got the highest rating in 5 years. And mostly I teach this class. So this is kind of comparing to my own numbers. We got the highest rating in 5 years. So I was really pleased with kind of our resilience, I think is the right word to think about how we consider that. One of the things I did over spring break was I built a studio. So remember, I talked about having an edX course. So I had some hardware. I had, a camera, and I had some microphones, lavalier microphones, and I had a green screen, and I had some sound baffles. And so this is my basement. And I had some lights, and I built a studio to allow me to make some videos, because a couple of the videos weren't finished. The edX course didn't have all the videos we needed for the spring, so I made some. So let me just show you about 40 seconds of what the videos look like when it's all put together. Here's an example. I hope the sound comes through, by the way. Here we go. Click. Now, what if I have a rule that instead of you're white, if either one of your parents, the one above or the one above and to the left, is white, but what if exactly one of them has to be white? If both of them are white, then you're black. And if both of them are black, you're also black. Only one of them. Watch what happens now. So this is what you get for 3x3. How about now? It's the cellular automata. Oh, there's like a little plane in there. How about now? Oh, there's like lots of little planes. Wait, how about, are you kidding me? Look what you get for that simple rule. You get this beautiful set of fractal, this is called the Sierpinski triangle. And you can make it even prettier if you center it. Huh? So this is done with loving post-processing in Adobe Premiere. I have a free source. YouTube has a set of jazz background. So I try to do this with as many of the video snippets I have. I do want to point people to a Learning at Scale paper, which is in my folder. If you click on that link I shared earlier, which talks about making sure if you do make asynchronous lecture videos to slice them up into no more than 6-minute pieces. Aim for 5 minutes, and if you have to, stop at 6 minutes. 6 minutes is the hard stop point. So it allows me to add some sound and add some this and kind of make it as like I'm doing the news. There's a cold front coming in from the west with the background slides behind me, and I always leave the left side of my slides. The way I do this is I have mostly older 4x3 slides, and I actually bring the slides to the 4x3 right side of a 16:9 square, leaving a little slice where I can place myself in there and not be on top of my slides. So that's typically how I do that. So I would typically move these slides to the right, move the content to the right, and leave a little slice on the left. And this is my background deck. So my advice going forward for folks, based on what I've learned, based on what I've seen, 3 words that I've heard over and over and over. And at some point you need to just hear these words enough times before they start to sink in and start to actually do them. And enough people were saying these things that I started to sit down and really think, why, how am I not, maxing out? How am I not hitting 100% on on all 3 of empathy, flexibility, and support? So the empathy angle is put yourself in their shoes. What if your family were suffering? How would you support this? This is the spring, but thinking of the fall, who knows what's going to hit a particular community or family as these waves come and go for different communities. And many of our students are at home when they're going to school because we've allowed for online learning. So people are in other countries. Who knows what's going on in that location? Allowing for flexible deadlines. Any other way to demonstrate knowledge. We're actually thinking of, normally we have a paper exam. Since we're going online, we're thinking for our architecture class, why not have them code some stuff in C? Have part of the exam be, nothing. You have no other resources, no Google, no anything. And then how about, probably no Google for the second part, but how about have them actually code something in C? Because we teach them C in our first lecture or two. You really want to do support low resource students. You want to do a survey, sweep your students, make sure that everybody has the tools they need. Do they have a microphone? Do they have a way to, if you're going to have an assessment, I'll talk about this in a second, do you have an assessment that requires a camera and a cell phone to make a video? Do you have that way to do that? Make sure that you're all supported. And I don't know, I don't have any easy answer. If they are in another country and they're not supported, I don't have an easy answer what you do in that case, but maybe you say, well, here's the minimum requirement. Maybe this course isn't for you this semester, unfortunately. But make sure there's a bar that everybody is above that bar. Preventing cheating in online exams is a perennial problem. People have known that for years. Online classes have been running concurrent to our normal classes face-to-face for years, and they all know that it's really hard to do that. And you have to often have a 360 camera, or you have to go into a site or something. It's hard to do. My class for the fall, I'm trying to do a model where I'm synchronous when possible. Different pieces of advice have said that asynchronous is better than synchronous, and the other piece of advice says synchronous is better. I'm finding that synchronous is better for students who need that rhythm, need that heartbeat where Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're doing something. If it's all async, if everything is async, it's really easy just to let it slip. And now I didn't watch it Monday, and now I'm behind a lecture. Now I'm behind 2 lectures. Now I'm behind 3. Now it's too hard to catch up. It's almost like there's a Seinfeld sketch about, he kisses this girlfriend and then forgets her name, and it's too late. Like once it's too late, you can't go back and ask her name. You've already kissed her. So in the same way, once you're kind of behind Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's almost too late. You just have to wait for the midterm and then cram for that. It's just, you almost feel guilty catching up. So I'm going to async contents and lectures. So all my lectures, I'm trying to build in my studio in the next bit or two. I've done a number of them. I'm going to try to finish that off. So all the content is at async. We're going to have a once a week check-in. So I want to have everybody come in just to see you. And I'm going to have as much as possible all the videos on just for the 10, 15 minutes of seeing you all and seeing each other. Like you're all in class. See, look, we're all a family together. The way I'm going to try to require that to know whether they've watched it, we have a new system in Berkeley called Kaltura. Different people, different things, but that's supposed to give us analytics of whether the students are watching a video. Plus, I'm going to have a little clicker question like edX used to give me at the end of every video. I mentioned before we're going to have a weekly sync once a week. We usually have 2 hours of lecture. I'm going to have 30 minutes. Every Monday morning we're going to start. Welcome to the Beauty and Joy Computing. Woo! We talk about computing in the news. And by the way, I encourage everybody to include computing in the news in their class as much as possible. Try to bring what's happening in the real world to your class. Please do this. I want to encourage that. And also give any updates. So this week we're learning recursion, blah, blah, blah. The labs will be async. They used to be synced with a lot of people supporting them. They'll be async if they want them. They'll be sync if they want them. But we're going to actually require everybody in pairs to have a sync checkoff. And it's going to be spaced around 18 hours of the day. It'll all be on Friday. And you'll check off that lab to kind of get credit for doing that. And we'll be able to have extra credit. And it's a time for students to be able to have videos are required for that 15 because it's only 2 or 3 people in that. So boom, videos required. Video on. You have to turn your video on, your audio on. We have to see you. We have to say, how are you doing? It's only a small group of people, and hopefully there's a small community there, and that'll keep together. You'll keep together with that group for the rest of the semester. Discussion is going to be every 6 hours. So boom, synchronous every 6 hours. Boom and boom and boom. Every 6 hours we're going to have discussion. All those 3 will be taped. So we'll have 3 actual versions of that taped. Plus we have an archive one of our student going over the worksheet. Essentially, it's active learning and discussion where there's a worksheet-based model. So we're just going to have somebody who is pre-recorded doing the worksheet. So that's already there. But if you want to see us do it live and ask questions live, we'll be there too. So it's like both. That's the flexibility. We give you the async, but we have sync if you want it. So encouraging sync, but if you can't make it work, here's the async. And try to deal with the time zones is hard. As I mentioned, exams are always been hard. We're going to do a take-home exam. We have no cheating in CS10, so I'll just say I'll trust them and sign a form and you'll be fine. That's probably going to be fine. It happened in the spring. But this is the first time teaching the architecture course, which has had some cheating in the past on projects. We think it'll continue to have cheating on exams if we just trust them. We don't think that we can trust that group, unfortunately. So we're going to have them do a time-lapse phone video of the room. So put their phone up on a stand that you can see their screen. And it'll be a time-lapse, not a continual video, but a time-lapse. So, it'll be every 5 seconds or something. So whatever they want to try to do, you can't go up. And I like the idea idea of breaking up the exam into pieces so they can do a restroom break. But we'll say, look, we'll give you 24 hours, but take any solid hour and don't get up in that hour. So hit the restroom and then drink your water and then go. And they have an hour solid, and then you submit a time-lapse video. So it's much less bandwidth, but much less kind of onus on the hardware for your camera to do that. I was so pleased that Jim brought me into this panel to share a connection. I'm also the vice chair of SIGC, so I wanted to make a connection and just speak broadly. I'm done with all the online learning stuff, but I would like to talk broadly about a connection between SIGCOMM and SIGC and building some bridges. So many of these white papers, so much of the work that you're doing and thinking about online learning is really innovative and should be shared with other folks. And it might be that SIGC is an avenue for that. You know, it's all about sharing best practices and research results about CS education, and certainly networking is a part of CS education. So let's try to encourage folks to apply to SIGC. The application deadline is in about a month. It's about maybe a little less, maybe 3 weeks-ish. So please think about submitting that white paper or that position paper or a panel. I would love to have a panel or 2 or 3 on networking. In the past, I was the symposium chair for the SIGC annual conference. We have 4 conferences. The technical symposium, typically people call, let's go to the SIGC conference. They mean the technical symposium. It's about 2,000 people. We're the 3rd largest SIG, by the way. So please think about joining us. The conference is typically in February or March. We're having conversations that it's probably going to be online. I don't want to make this official, but it's probably going to be online this coming year. So we'd love vaccines to be worldwide distributed and be able to go face-to-face, but probably not. So we're thinking that it's going to be online. So it's easy to attend, pretty cheap. We've lowered our prices because of having to pay for rooms and all that. So think about it coming, think about applying to this. And we started, Tiffany Barnes and I, we were symposium chairs, started a sisters track, which means it's a track for other SIGs to join and have a track for just you. We had SIGC and SIG-Chi and SIG-IT. Think about being one of our sister tracks. That'd be great. We also have an active SIGC members group. And so if you join SIGC, it's not that much money a year, you'll be added to our SIGC members group. I think I've gone long. Thank you so much for the time, and nice to see everybody. Wonderful.
Great. Thank you for the great presentation, Dan. So I don't know, Jim, how tight of a schedule are we on? Are we able to have a little discussion? Or?
Yeah, actually, I just messaged all the panelists and suggested that we'll just run to 9:30 and we'll start the BOFs a little bit late because discussion's important.
Okay, perfect. That's great. So maybe I can start off by posing one of the questions that Freda had on Slack, and I think it's a general question for all the panelists. So the question is that many of your courses have an unconventional format or focus, and you're able to do like really cool things that worked really well online. So for those of us who can't radically change the conventional format of the course that we are teaching, do you think there are some key parts of your approach that you could extract and use within a more traditional format of course? So it's an open question for the panelists.
Yeah, maybe from my point of view, we recorded the lecture periodically before. Now I recorded the lecture in advance, and probably I will keep that. This is much more convenient than for the students to watch the lecture when they want, and rather have kind of a flipped classroom teaching. So that's what I learned also from student feedback. That might be quite good also for the students.
Yeah, this is Dan, isn't directly answering the question, but it does. I mean, the larger question of what would we then change, if we went back and we learned what we learned here. I love the idea we put all these resources together. We're building automated. By the way, I do want to give props to a system called Prairie Learn from Illinois, which allows us to write question generators that randomize the exams for every student. And we're using that quite successfully in the summer, and we're going to try it. We're going to launch our first big pilot in the fall. So we're going to be using Prairie Learn going forward. Prairie Learn really was needed because of needing to kind of stem I got, question 3 is A, make sure it's A and share that on a chat. And all of a sudden everybody puts A, and now all of a sudden the question is lost. Everybody gets a different question. So some of the technologies that are being built and being put forward, some of the resources are being accumulated together for courses, I think will continue to be used. And I think we're going to have a question about, should we flip our classrooms going forward? If we have all these resources we built for the COVID time, why not flip them going forward if actually students are happier and learning more? I love it. Love the idea.
Yeah, I agree. I think for pretty much any class, no matter how it's structured, especially right now, thinking about how to keep students engaged. So even if you have like a very, traditional sort of lecture problem set, that kind of style class, thinking about, how do you, even with offering asynchronous material, how can you encourage students to ask questions about the lecture, to respond to them, and to do all of that. And I think there's a lot of tools out there now that make that really easy. And so I think that's something that we'll continue to think about as if O33 is remote again, and when it's back in person. And it's something that I'm thinking about for the class that I teach in the fall, which is also like a networking class, but a little bit more traditional than O33.
From my perspective, interaction is quite important, and whatever new technology or tool or everything facilitates this, it might be good to try to in the future. Yeah.
So I guess a follow-up to that, we're trying to encourage interactivity either by having more recitations or by using these tools. So what's the balance of that? Do we need like lots of staff to help us make things engaging? Or are there enough tools that can help us do it? Like create these wonderful videos that Dan was showing. I mean, how do we both best utilize our resources? Like, do we need manpower? Do we need tools? How can we do it?
One thing that was really helpful for us was coming up with ways to encourage students to interact with each other. So the way we set up sort of students discussion on Piazza was that we basically required some set of students to kind of make new posts, and then other sets of students to respond to those posts. And because of how the class is structured, doing that was not as difficult as it sounds. But it meant that a lot of the engagement, before my recitations happened without me needing to really be involved. I would occasionally jump in, but mostly, I would just check in before the discussion, read what they were thinking about to kind of focus my discussion. But it didn't require a ton of instructor time. So I think leveraging other students in the class can work really well there.
Well, I also think that with experimenting with different formats, we can make this also to some extent scalable, right? If we think about classical approaches, then the workload on our side as teaching staff is quite high, I guess. But for example, to foster engagement between students and also coming up with new formats that will very likely help to make it also scale and in some sense also time efficient for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess the related question there was some discussion in the Slack is how much time should we be spending on these recitations, and what about the size and scale? Because I think Katrina talked about that, and also Florian, you talked about that as well, a little bit as well, because you both have these discussion sessions going on. So what did you find to be sort of the best length and sort of the number of students? Was there a good, what was the right middle ground?
So for us, we started with small groups of students after the disruption happened. So 5 to 6 students, which meant that we only ran our discussions for about 20 minutes or so, because there was just no way for instructors to, dedicate an hour, like 6 or 7 times a week. What we were really surprised to find is that actually those discussions would have worked just fine with 10 or 12 students. So if we do this again, that's probably the kind of sweet spot we'll aim to hit. We did, to make this happen, we did sacrifice some content. So normally in the class, we read 2 papers a week. We dropped down to 1. It made things a lot easier to organize. The students, they missed some breadth in terms of what they read, but we were pretty happy with the general material that they were able to cover. So that's, we will definitely consider like those types of structural changes in the future to make sure that, you know, the students are getting out of the class what we want them to get out of it, but that, you know, instructors aren't, you know, we're not teaching 80 hours a week, like we're not doing crazy things or spending a ton of additional time compared to what we would spend in a normal semester.
Yes, well, in our case, for our seminar, we simply distributed the load between the instructors. So we were 3 people, and in particular, Elias and Christoph just shared the load between the 2 of them by being responsible for one topic or one paper a week. And the other one simply supports and takes part of the seminar as every other participant. As I said, we try to be less invasive for these discussions anyway. So yeah, that's what we tried, and therefore we also kept the load more or less manageable for us.
Did you also experiment with the session length, or do you have any experience with that, or was it just like a fixed length class? So, you know, that's just how the length.
For us, it was a fixed length class. We did not enforce a certain length, but it was more or less natural to use the 1.5 hours that we have given by going through the paper and then having also a general discussion on the paper as well. We often recognize that we could continue the discussion for hours, I guess, but that was part of the lead's job to chair the session and keep an eye on the timing as well. So we do not stretch it artificially in any case. So, but we had weekly discussions with exactly one group of 10 to 15 people, which was very manageable. Katrina, you had basically multiple sessions with different groups every week, which makes it much more complicated. So I completely understand that you limited it to 20 to 30 minutes a session.
I just want to add that learning science research shows that cohort-based learning works, and that cohort could be, you know, the group of African Americans who cluster together and take classes together, and that may be supported by campus in terms of having them meet each other. But having a group of students, 3, 4, 5, have them know each other, be a cluster, having a learning community, and work together throughout the semester if they can stay together, and then meeting with that group once a week, outstanding. I'm sure that you've seen great results. That the research backs that up, and so we're looking to do that ourselves. We're doing either, is it 2, is it 4, is it 6? We're playing with the numbers, but we love the idea as well.
In our case, we also ran a survey asking for the opinions of the students, and they really liked the fact that we were running as a tool, a forum. Every student, whenever they had any question or whatever, the question could be posted there, and assistants could answer, or even other students could participate. And the post was there for everyone to see, and this was quite a good tool in general to use, a forum.
Yeah, that kind of relates to, I think Katrina was also talking about using Piazza, which is a forum to complement the lectures. So it sounds like you're saying this also worked really well for your class.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So let's move on to another question coming from the Edmundo. So he's asking if you only have a laptop to prepare for instructors to prepare these asynchronous lectures, and you can only use open software, can you still do a good job? Or do you need like fancy studio like Dan had and Adobe Premiere and all this knowledge of how to do video recording? Like what can you do on a bare bones level?
So I've actually come up with a way to hack your way through Zoom. Well, first of all, Zoom, there's a new startup. It's called and I don't have any, I'm not on the payroll, but I've seen the demos and it blew me away. It's mmhmm.app, and it's they had a little video which was amazing what they showed. So essentially it allowed you to do what I was doing in a studio, but in Zoom. You know, you can put your slides behind you, right? Why can't your slides be part of the green screen that I have? So your slides are behind you. You can place yourself on the side. It looked like John Oliver. It's amazing. So when that goes live, jump on that if you can. There's a way to hack it in Zoom if you don't have, you know, Camtasia or other things to do this. Is you stand on the side of your slides like this. So I'm looking at the camera, and then you place your deck over here, and then you use the background to change through slides. So you don't get the transitions, but you could go to, I'm going to grab here my thing. I'm saying slide 1. Let me change my first. So slide 1 and slide 2, you'll notice that we're doing this, and then slide 3, and I'm clicking through my slides as I'm changing my virtual background. So it's a way to hack it through. Anyway, my point is it's for free. You don't have to post-process it because you say stop, you say start recording, stop recording, you know, with nobody in the call and just you doing it, and you end up getting a pretty professional look. So it's kind of nice. Again, no animation you get between slides, but it's pretty good. It's a hack.
That's a great suggestion. I think we should add that to the community resources later, but
sure.
That's wonderful. So I guess on that note, also related to what Dr. Braun was talking about on the accessibility note, rather than accessibility of the instructors, did you experience issues with accessibility of students? I know people were asking on the Slack, like people didn't have printers, or actually in my case, some students don't have cameras. So, you know, how do you handle those kinds of issues, or even bandwidth issues, unless you're using the time-lapse idea?
So in our case, we didn't really have problems with resources. So usually people have their smartphone, their laptop, also printers was not really a big problem. So
I see. Yeah, because it really depends on the population of students that you're dealing with. But yeah, I think it's can be an issue sometimes.
I think time zones are the hardest thing. I mean, people may or may not have talked about that, but how do you support folks at every single time zone across the world? I think that was the challenge we have, and so we're trying to make it, you know, by running kind of 18-hour blocks. And the nice thing is, some of our teaching staff are themselves remote. So we were TA in China. Guess what? You're doing the China time zone. So that's a way to kind of resolve that. But that's a real challenge actually, because you know people say we encourage you to synchronous. What does it mean if people have to get up at 3 a.m. to be in class? That doesn't make much sense. So it's harder.
Yeah, I think Katrina, you were gonna say something, or?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, in terms of different access to different resources, you know, we let students turn off their videos if that was a problem for them. We had a couple students who just participated in Zoom via text, often because they didn't have access to quiet space. So they could sort of listen to us, but they weren't able to talk. We didn't really talk about this in the paper much, but for the lectures, so I pre-recorded the lectures just with voiceover on top of slides, which was done partly because we were understaffed and I was teaching lectures and recitations, so something had to happen first. But in doing that, we made recordings available at a bunch of different sizes. You can get the size of those recordings down pretty small. So for students that had trouble downloading things, that was useful for us. But Dan's right, time zones is tricky. Going forward, you know, if we have to do this again in the spring, I think one thing we'll do is sort of group students in similar time zones together, right? So Karen mentioned in Slack that she ended up having recitations as early as 10 a.m. and some as late as 8 p.m. She had kind of a wide range of time zones with her specific section. My students were a little bit more manageable. So I taught in pretty standard business hours on the East Coast, but that is definitely a big challenge. And I totally agree, right? Synchronous is great, but not if all of my students are getting up in the middle of the night.
Okay, great. So Jim, are we stopping at now or in 10 minutes?
No, I think my video is on now. Because we're going to need people in order to join the BOFs. They're going to need to leave this Zoom channel and join a different Zoom channel for either of the two BOFs. So maybe and that'll give people 5 or 10 minutes to switch.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think that was a really great discussion, and you guys should also check out the Slack because there is a lot of really interesting details there. I certainly learned a lot, and just to summarize, you know, it's been really tough teaching during this online format, but I have to say I was really heartened by hearing all of your experiences. and all these cool techniques to try to make it good. And it was really exciting to me to hear that students actually preferred the online format in some ways. I think that was really good. So we always think about how, we always complain about how difficult it is to teach now, but I think this session was really wonderful to hear techniques that have worked for people and to hear that students are actually having positive feedback. So thank you all the panelists for your time.
Yeah, Matt and I want to add our thumbs up and thank the panelists. And Jiasi, thank you for putting together the great session, really inspirational. And I think you can see that also it's reflected in the responses. So next is we're going to break out into 2 birds of a feather session. You could, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to leave this main workshop panel. And then in about 9 minutes, we're going to start up the 2 separate Zoom channels. And again, the idea there is going to be, we've got 2 Google Docs, and we're going to think of those as a community bulletin board. And folks can edit and post things on there. And so Matt has, again, about how to, excuse me, how to join that and where the Google Docs are. And so we'll proceed on there. So I think with that, we're the first session. Thanks to panelists, see folks in the BOFs, and then we're going to come back at I guess that must be 10:45 and start the final session on time. So we'll see folks shortly.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.